The laughter started the moment the dusty 1969 Camaro rolled into the polished driveway of Sterling Vale Industries, and within seconds, everyone standing outside the glass headquarters knew exactly who the joke was about. The car looked like it had survived another century. Its faded blue paint was hidden beneath a thin coat of road dust, one headlight was slightly crooked, and the chrome bumper carried scratches that told stories no luxury vehicle ever could. Behind the wheel sat Everett Cole, a tired single father in a neatly pressed but inexpensive shirt, his hands rough from years of mechanical work. He had come to meet the most powerful CEO in the city, but when Vivian Ashford stepped outside and saw his Camaro, she laughed so loudly that several executives turned toward her. Everett lowered his eyes, not because he was ashamed of the car, but because he had spent years learning that some people could see a cracked windshield and never imagine the broken heart behind it. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change a person's life, please like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to our channel so our community can keep sharing stories that remind us what truly matters. Everett was 42 years old and had been raising his 11-year-old daughter, Clara, alone since her mother passed away 3 years earlier. He worked as an independent automotive restoration specialist from a small rented garage behind his modest house. His life was not glamorous. Most mornings began before sunrise, but the story itself unfolded during daylight, because Everett had little time to waste once the day began. He packed Clara's lunch, checked her homework, drove her to school in the old Camaro whenever it was running properly, and then spent his afternoons rebuilding engines, repairing industrial machinery, and occasionally restoring classic cars for wealthy collectors. The Camaro had belonged to his father, a quiet man who had taught Everett everything he knew about machines. After his father's death, Everett could never bring himself to sell it. It was more than transportation. It was the last physical reminder of the man who had once placed a small wrench in his son's hand and told him that broken things were not always useless things. Sometimes they simply needed someone patient enough to understand them. That morning, Everett had not arrived at Sterling Vale to discuss cars at all. He had been invited because of a technical proposal his small consulting business had submitted to the company. Sterling Vale Industries operated manufacturing facilities across the country, and one of its largest plants had been experiencing repeated failures in a specialized cooling system. The company's engineers had spent months trying to solve the problem. Everett had reviewed their publicly available technical specifications, recognized a flaw that nobody else seemed to notice, and submitted a proposal explaining how he could redesign the system. He did not know that the contract could eventually be worth millions. He only knew that if he won it, he could pay off his workshop debt, secure Clara's future, and finally stop wondering whether one unexpected repair bill would force him to choose between keeping his business alive and buying groceries. Vivian Ashford had built Sterling Vale from a struggling family company into a global manufacturing empire. She was brilliant, disciplined, and famously impatient. Her employees respected her because she demanded excellence, but many feared her because she rarely tolerated mistakes. She had grown up watching her father lose everything after trusting the wrong people, and somewhere along the way, she had convinced herself that compassion was a luxury successful people could not afford. When Everett walked toward the entrance, carrying a worn leather folder, she glanced at the Camaro again and gave a dismissive smile. To her, it looked like a symbol of everything she believed she had left behind: poverty, improvisation, uncertainty, and struggle. Everett noticed the laughter but said nothing. He had heard it before in different forms. People had laughed when he told them he was raising a daughter alone. They had laughed when he said his little workshop could compete with companies 10 times its size. They had laughed when he refused to sell his father's Camaro for a quick profit. But Everett had learned something during the hardest years of his life: you could spend your entire life trying to prove people wrong, or you could quietly become someone they could no longer ignore. He chose the second. Inside the conference room, Vivian expected a nervous mechanic with a clever idea. Instead, she found a man who had spent 3 sleepless years studying systems engineering between school pickups, grocery runs, customer repairs, and parenting responsibilities. Everett's presentation was simple. There were no expensive graphics, no corporate jargon, and no team of consultants. He had brought handwritten calculations, detailed diagrams, and a small working prototype he had built from discarded components. When he explained why Sterling Vale's cooling system kept failing, the room gradually became silent. Their chief engineers had been replacing the wrong component. Everett had discovered that the real problem was a pressure imbalance created by an outdated design. Vivian interrupted several times, challenging his assumptions. Everett calmly answered each question. She asked where he had studied. He explained that he had never attended an elite university. Most of what he knew had been learned from his father, vocational courses, technical manuals, years inside repair shops, and a relentless habit of studying every machine that crossed his path. One executive quietly smirked at that answer, but the expression disappeared when Everett demonstrated a simulation showing exactly how his redesign would prevent the repeated failures. Vivian finally leaned back in her chair and studied him differently. The man she had laughed at outside was not asking for charity. He was offering a solution. But instead of accepting the proposal immediately, she made an offer that stunned everyone in the room. Sterling Vale would test his design at one facility. If it worked, they would consider a larger contract. Everett accepted without hesitation. He knew this might be his only chance. The next 10 days became a quiet battle of determination. Everett spent the first few days working alongside Sterling Vale's engineering team. Some respected him immediately, while others resented the fact that an outsider had discovered what they had missed. Vivian watched closely. She expected Everett to become arrogant after proving himself, but he never did. Whenever an engineer found a small issue, Everett listened. Whenever someone offered an improvement, he tested it. He did not need to be the smartest person in the room. He simply needed the machine to work. Meanwhile, Clara waited for her father every afternoon. She knew he was trying to win an important contract, but she never asked how much money it could bring. Instead, she worried about whether he was eating lunch. One afternoon, she brought him a paper drawing of the Camaro, showing it completely restored with shiny wheels and bright paint. At the bottom she had written, "Grandpa would be proud." Everett stared at the drawing for a long time before folding it carefully and placing it inside his wallet. On the 8th day, the test system ran longer than it ever had before. On the 9th day, it surpassed every performance target Sterling Vale had established. By the 10th day, the company had enough data to understand that Everett's redesign could save millions in maintenance costs across its entire network of facilities. That morning, Vivian walked outside and saw the dusty Camaro again. This time, she did not laugh. Everett stepped out wearing the same modest shirt he had worn to the first meeting. Clara's drawing was still in his wallet. He expected to be called into the building for another technical review, but instead Vivian approached him personally. Her expression was different now. There was no arrogance in it, only something Everett had rarely seen from powerful people: humility. She told him Sterling Vale wanted to acquire his technology and sign his company to a long-term contract. The initial agreement was worth $100 million. Everett stood completely still. He had imagined winning the contract. He had imagined paying his debts. He had imagined buying better equipment for his workshop and putting money away for Clara's education. But he had never imagined a number that large. Yet the most important moment came when Vivian apologized for laughing at his Camaro. Everett could have embarrassed her in return. He could have reminded her of the executives who had smirked at him. He could have told her that the car she mocked was older than half the people in the building and had carried him through some of the worst days of his life. Instead, he simply accepted her apology. Vivian admitted that she had made a mistake. She had judged his life by what she saw on the outside. She had confused wealth with worth and appearance with ability. Everett told her that everyone makes mistakes, but not everyone has the courage to admit them. That sentence stayed with her. The contract was finalized later that afternoon. But Everett surprised everyone by refusing to abandon his small workshop. He used part of the money to expand it into a training center for young mechanics and struggling parents who wanted a second chance at skilled careers. He also established a scholarship in his father's name for students who could not afford expensive technical education. Vivian became involved with the project, not as a celebrity executive, but as someone trying to rebuild her understanding of success. She visited the workshop several weeks later and saw Clara sitting beside her father while he worked on the Camaro. The car was still dusty. It still had scratches. It still carried the marks of decades. But now there was something different about it. Everett had finally restored the engine completely, yet he refused to repaint the body. He wanted the scratches to remain because they reminded him that beautiful things did not have to hide where they had been. Vivian stood beside the car quietly, and Clara showed her the drawing she had made days earlier. Vivian smiled and told her that the drawing had been right all along. Grandpa would have been proud. Everett looked at his daughter and realized that the greatest reward had never been the $100 million contract. It was the fact that Clara had watched her father face humiliation without becoming bitter, succeed without becoming arrogant, and forgive without forgetting the lesson. The dusty Camaro eventually became a familiar sight outside the newly expanded workshop. Wealthy executives parked beside it. Engineers came to learn from Everett. Young mechanics photographed it. Parents who had lost jobs found opportunities there. And every time someone asked why he kept an old, scratched car when he could afford anything he wanted, Everett gave the same simple explanation: because his father had taught him that a machine could be damaged without losing its value, and people were no different. 10 days earlier, Vivian had seen an old Camaro and laughed at the man who drove it. 10 days later, that same man stepped out as the owner of a company entrusted with a $100 million contract. But the real transformation was not in his bank account. It was in the hearts of two people who learned that day that dignity cannot be measured by clothing, wealth, or the shine of a car. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is carrying the very answer everyone else has been searching for. Sometimes the roughest road creates the strongest character. And sometimes forgiveness becomes more powerful than revenge because it gives both people a chance to become better than they were before. Before the story ends, leave a meaningful comment telling us what you would have done if you were Everett. Would you have forgiven Vivian, or would you have walked away after being humiliated? Let your words remind someone in our community that success means more when it does not destroy your kindness. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because sometimes the person people laugh at today becomes the person they desperately need tomorrow. And as Everett drove the old 1969 Camaro home that afternoon, Clara sitting proudly beside him, the sunlight reflected off its dusty hood. He smiled, reached over, and gently tapped the steering wheel his father had once held. The car was still old. The scratches were still there. But Everett finally understood that he had never needed to erase the marks of his past. They were proof that he had survived it.